Oscar, do you want to take some questions from some
of
of the women in the audience? Because at the moment all of the questions have been men.
All right, thank you very much for the... Yes, I think there's one woman over there, yes. So, yes, sorry, behind, yes.
I wonder whether we have any forum to discuss these. I'm thinking in terms of faster trains from Ely to London, increasing the centralisation, which to my mind is not anything, and that they all arrive in Cambridge full. So the existing Cambridge commuters can't get on the train. The other big conflict is between fast intercity type trains and the local trains, Norwich, talking about Addenbrooks and Wisbeach and all these
yes, there is a capacity from certain places, obviously.
We have no real mechanism for getting them meshed in.
Yes, thank you.
It's a really, really difficult one.
Thank you. Do we have any more? Because as Anthony said, all the questions, it's just been men putting their hand up so far. So if there are any other women who want to ask a question, we'll take them first. And then, yes, right at the back.
It's more of an observation than anything. I think I've always associated the Green Party as being green, and I think you misunderstand that you think people use trains instead of using the roads, and if you get people on the trains, then they'll be off the roads. But quite a lot of us use the roads because we can't use the trains, and if you're not going to spend any money on the road, I'm on the verge of getting off my bicycle and getting into my car, because the routes to and from work, they're so potholed that it's getting dangerous. So instead of getting people off the roads and onto the trains, you're going to get them into the cars. And that to me just makes no sense. Improve the railway system and improve the road system, and then let people choose what's best.
All right,
you do have to let people choose. I was a bit concerned when you said that the rail companies are encouraging people to take journeys they don't want to take. I don't think that's true. I think people will make their own decision. I don't think they encourage you to take a journey you don't want to take.
A journey they wouldn't want to take if the fares are different rates.
Any more women before we...
That's an argument for higher fares. Yeah.
Any more women? No, Tom at the back. Tom Sleep.
I just want to ask, like, when this is particularly just asked to the Green Party and campaign about transport, because when the fares goes up, there's always a big debate about that, and particularly the debate is focused on people who spend a particularly large amount on train tickets, on big season tickets, £4 Swindon to London, Cambridge to London, etc. And I think that you have to really, instead of just saying, oh, that's an awful lot of money, it should be lower, I think you really have to ask about how sustainable that actually is. It costs an awful lot of money to take, in Swindon's case, to get someone to travel on a 125-mile-an-hour train, 100 miles to London and back again every evening. First thing in the morning, first thing in the evening. That costs a lot of money. It's not particularly environmentally sustainable. It would probably be more environmentally sustainable if they drove 3 miles to work, to be honest. And it would be just nice to just have a bit of comment on that.
Good question. Anyone? Yes.
I have a question about modernisation, and basically you talk about the 5-year plans. I'm not quite sure how they work, but what's the project to modernise trains? Because really, I come from the southwest, and like you have trains where you have to lean out the window in order to open them, and the hands on the outside of the train, which is just absolutely ridiculous. And actually, I think it's a health and safety hazard and not fair for disabled people either. But what's the scheme of basically replacing trains that are substandard?
Yeah, all right. Thank you very much for your questions. Charles, are you ready to respond to any of them?
A couple of things. So the question about the conflict of interests and the difficulty of choosing how to use limited capacity between longer distance services, commuter services, whatever, is a real genuine challenge. 2 or 3 things on that. One, I think it's fundamentally you have to look at the railway as a system and a network. You can't look at things in isolation, so you need somebody who is able to look at that in totality and make do the analysis and make choices and trade-offs around that, and people have to work together to do that. Second point, you can't just click your fingers and magic those capacity issues away, so that comes back to long-term planning. So something that we do on behalf of the industry is market studies, route studies about what the future potential use of the railway is, what the likely growth is, and then identifying how we might accommodate that growth. So ideally you can do that by playing tunes on the timetable, because that's obviously the cheapest way of doing it, but you can't always do that, unfortunately. So that's when you migrate towards investment. So some of that might be investment in the existing infrastructure. So we've seen some of that, for instance, on the line down through Royston to King's Cross in terms of lengthening platforms and lengthening trains, and that's happened quite a lot around the country. And if we are able to increase the capacity of the whole network, you then begin to be able to actually accommodate the various different uses of the network. But we're never going to meet every individual's requirements, because there are bits of the railway which are much less heavily used than other bits, and where you have a very lightly used bit of the railway, it is always going to require very significant amounts of subsidy. So it comes back to a political choice in terms of whether the country is prepared to invest in that bit of the railway. But what's really important is that we're continuing, I think, as an industry, to analyse what the future for the railway is and provide options and choices to funders in government, be it in central government or devolved government. So that was the first point I wanted to make. Second one was about just a bit about these 5-year plans and all of that. So what I've been talking about is plans for running the fixed infrastructure. That's what we, Network Rail, are responsible for. I've just in the previous answer talked about some of that in terms of, for example, lengthening platforms to allow longer trains. But there are a whole myriad of different investments. We are currently out to consultation. I think it's still open. I should have looked up before I came, on our route study on the West Anglia route. So that's on our website. Anybody is welcome to look at that and respond to that, because it is a broad consultation process. We clearly work closely with lots of industry parties, local government, etc.
The improving connectivity is also.
There are a number of ones, but that was the specific one that I'm aware of locally here. In terms of rolling stock, government has invested hugely in rolling stock in recent years in terms of modernising it, but there's still some pretty ancient rolling stock out there, so it will carry on needing to be replaced.
Quick question on the rolling stock. Who actually owns the rolling stock that the government has actually paid for?
So
who owns it?
Well, so the government specifies what's required. The rolling stock companies will have acquired it and leased it in terms of the financial flows to the government.
But obviously it's different for different stock, isn't it? There are different rolling stock leasing companies which bought the trains from BR, as far as I understand it, then they leased them out. But for new rolling stock, it's a different process. Perhaps Colin knows.
Yeah, two major recent procurements are directly organised by the government. The Thameslink stock funded by the supplier, in effect, through a bank. The IEPs, God knows how that's been done, but they're outside the rolling scoping. And then already we're being told we're going to have trains to London and Cambridge with no tables, no seats related properly to the windows, all because it's a government decision, and it's both the current and the previous government are implicated in this shambles.
All right, do you have anything to say on any of those questions?
Yes, two points. First of all, on the issue of advanced tickets, I mean when I travel on the East Coast and other intercity trains, what I often see is huge numbers of reservations that aren't taken up. I don't know why that is, and I don't know, but I think someone ought to be finding out what happened, why that is, and making appropriate changes to the system. The other thing is, someone mentioned about the fact that roads are getting harder to use because of potholes. Well, that is not the sort of thing which that's not the sort of road improvement that Campaign for Better Transport is opposing. It's a sort of huge road-oriented upgrade of the A14. I mean, I personally am not opposed to doing something to the A14, but I'm opposed to doing what the Highways Agency think ought to be done. And for the A14 corridor, my top priority, given that there is no railway that really follows it, would be to get an express bus service linking all the main towns, Cambridge, Huntingdon, Kettering and Rugby, where people could interchange with the mainline railways. And at present, for example, you can get from Cambridge to Huntingdon by bus, but it takes over an hour, and Kettering is at Rugby are completely impossible on the A14 corridor. You have to go through Bedford, and the only thing is that if you want to go to Birmingham, you can actually get a stagecoach have actually introduced a mega bus service that only runs 3 times a day though.
Thank you.
And yes, that's all I've got to say.
Linda?
I don't have anything else to add on these particular points.
No, that's fine. You don't have to. Not everyone has to speak on everything. Who is first? Daniel is first.
Oh, quite happily to. Yes. First of all, to respond on the very interesting point I thought about conflicting priorities. However you do it, you're always going to have to resolve some of those. And that's partly what Labour's looking at in terms of the guiding mind idea. At the moment, the way conflicting priorities are dealt with is essentially through market mechanisms. And the question is, who decides those priorities? And I think the big change we want to see is actually bringing customers in through things like customer focus much more into all these decision-making processes. You're still going to have to make some trade-offs, but at the moment it's really just for the train operating companies to work out how they actually best deal often with the network charges and so on to their advantage. Whereas what we want to see is those things resolved in a way that actually works for passengers as well. On the rolling stock issue, I mean, I think it's fair to say, and I rather agree with Colin on this, it has been a shambles for a very long time. And part of the problem we then end up with is inadequate stock on different lines. And again, not very clear who makes those decisions. It's often the train operating companies to their advantage. And again, very little input from customers, exactly as we're hearing about the changes to trains around Cambridge next year. Who's really had any input to that? And just one final point in the banter about who did what when. I have to say the biggest change I've noticed on the railway down to King's Cross was when we went from 8 to 12 carriages, and that was under the last Labour government, and it was delivered. And let me just launch an incendiary right at the end. There was a little question of a £200 million guided busway just outside Cambridge, which was also delivered under the Labour government. And whatever people might have thought about it before then, indifferent or whatever, otherwise, it actually has, I think now, actually worked rather well. And what's interesting about it is it was, of course, paid for in a conventional procurement process. And look how well that worked.
All right, you wanted to speak next. Yeah.
I'll take the questions that were directed at me. Very interesting questions, thank you. On the question about road and rail and cycling, what Simon said was very helpful, I thought. I think you may have slightly misunderstood what I was saying. We're here at a rail event, so I've been mostly talking about rail, that this document is about a completely holistic view of transport. And when you take that kind of view, then obviously you have to take cycling utterly seriously. We want to make Cambridge the best cycling city in Europe. We would put a massive investment into cycling. That's not the same thing as putting a massive investment into roads, right? A lot of what we need to do is create joined up off-road cycling routes, and to ensure that where cyclists need to be on roads, then there's absolute priority given to their safety. So I think we would be doing exactly what you wanted in that regard. On the question of advanced fares, again, I think there might have been a slight misunderstanding. I think we should ask the question, why has the number of journeys on rail gone up so much since privatisation? And part of the answer is that privatisation and the profit motive has incentivised companies to incentivise passengers to take journeys that they wouldn't have taken unless they put those economic incentives into place. To take journeys that are sometimes economically and socially insignificant, often at the expense of people who are more dependent upon the railways for more significant purposes. Now, I'm someone who loves the railways and absolutely depends on them, and I have to say it does quite annoy me sometimes. You get on a carriage and it's absolutely full of advanced reservations, right? It shouldn't be that way. We would, as I said earlier, put the top priority of fare reduction into walk-up fares to make train travel something convenient to do right there and then when you need to do it. On the question of how to alter fares, a very, very well taken question, and tying that in with sustainability. Absolutely, the top priority in relation to transport policy is reducing the need to travel. Right? That's what transport policy should really be all about, and that's what the heart of it is from a green point of view. So it's things like Wi-Fi, it's things like proper planning policies, so you don't end up with situations where people are forced to take their cars, etc. in the first place. So what we ought to do is absolutely not encourage excessive dependence upon commuting, which is why we're opposed to HS2. And we would put the vast sums of money that are planned to be spent on HS2 into improving the railways around the nation. The amount you could do with the money that's supposedly going to be devoted to HS2 could fund thousands upon thousands of miles of new rail improvements, etc., reduced fares. So absolutely, we need to think from the very beginning, and that's what of course we do in the Greens, about sustainability in relation to transport, and reducing the need to travel in the first place is the top priority. And finally, on the fascinating question about open windows, I understand what you mean about saying it does seem a little bit old-fashioned to have to lean out to open the door. But one thing I love about trains is when you get windows that you actually can open. And I don't want us to have a future in which all the windows and all the trains are sealed shut, as unfortunately quite a lot of the rolling stock in recent years has been. That would, it seems to me, take a lot of the romance out of train travel.
So much to cover here. I mean, just to try to take them in the order things have come up, the conflict of interest point is a huge, huge challenge. You have a constrained network, lots and lots of capacity limits. How do you try to make it better? There are some answers around platforms, some around tracks, some around knowing where the trains are so you can fit them in better. It's one of the reasons, though, why I'm very keen on East-West Rail. Because for ages, since Victorian era, we've been London-centric. All the routes radiate out from London. So if you want to get from Cambridge, say, to Oxford, you go down into London and back out again, adding two very, very congested routes. And that's simply not sensible. If we had the East-West Rail link, you would relieve a lot of that congestion through London. It would make life a lot easier. You'd be able to go along again from Ipswich, Norwich, come along. You could intersect with the East Coast Main Line, the Midland Main Line, West Coast Main Line. You would have these alternative routes. So that would help with that. The issue about potholes, huge issue. I'm a very keen cyclist. I chair the all-party cycling group. And you have to do a lot of that. This government has put more money into fixing potholes. If you look around Cambridge, you'll see areas where that is happening. There's a lot more to do. You have to have good quality on-road and off-road cycle facilities. I led a big inquiry we did nationally and got Parliament to support called Get Britain Cycling, if you want to see the full details of that. But you might also be amused by the fact that the Telegraph ran a piece 6 months ago with the 5 daftest Lib Dem policies. And one of them was the idea of spending £10 per person per year on cycling. So, you know, they think that's a daft policy. I think it's a very sensible thing to do, and we need to rise up beyond that towards 20. Which about encouraging trips being an interesting dialogue here. I haven't seen the evidence. I would be surprised if there was a lot of trips that wouldn't happen otherwise, but I haven't seen the evidence on it. What I think is important is that advance tickets play an important role in trying to smooth out when people travel. If you push everybody to show up, what you do is you concentrate people at the peak. And that has real problems with extra congestion. You know, as I said much earlier on, it'd be great if we could encourage people to move there. Flexible working has a lot to be said. You know, the amount of congestion that would be eased on the roads as well as the railways, if more people were able to work 1 day a week at home, say, you can't in all jobs, but where you can, that would ease a huge amount of congestion. The issue about not travelling is when I used to be our transport spokesperson. I tried to get the Department of Transport interested in how do we get people not to travel by providing really good video conferencing suites and things like that. And they said, that's not our business, we are the Department for Transport, not the Department for Not Transport. Which was really frustrating. On the old style train things, there is a system of cascade where new trains come in, the ones which have just been displaced go down to somewhere less popular and cascade down. There are places I suspect we're very pleased to have some of those. I personally have quite a romantic attachment to those old trains because I remember them on the route up. But you're absolutely right, they're rubbish for people with disabilities. The ones that still have compartments in are particularly bad for vulnerable people travelling at night. And there's been a lot of cases of assault with that. Just finally to pick up on some of the mega projects we've had. High Speed 2 is something which I'm strongly in favour of, not because it gets people quickly, but because we need the rail capacity on the West Coast Main Line. There is simply no alternative. If you want people to be able to travel by rail along that route, we've doubled it already, we simply don't, and we'll run out of capacity otherwise. So there's a choice. Do you want capacity on that route, or do you want to force people to drive or fly? We're already in the position where freight cannot access that route. People who would like to ship freight by rail cannot, and are having to do it on road because there is no capacity. I'm not bothered about the high speedness of it, I'm bothered about the capacity of it. Daniel picked up the guided bus. I think he referred to it as a £200 million project. That probably is about the final figure. In terms of procurement process, it was originally billed at I think 63 million, somebody will remember the exact figures, and the way it rose and rose and rose, and the continuing problems with it continues to alarm me quite heavily. Lastly on the A14, I'm not a fan of massive road building. I would transfer a lot of money away from the huge infrastructure projects towards more local things, and cycling and so forth. And in fact, I have an amendment in Parliament at the moment to have a cycling and walking strategy, trying to push for some of that money to be pushed over. So I would move away from the massive road schemes. On the other hand, anybody who's used the A14 will know that it is unsafe, that the congestion there is too bad, that you do need roads. So I'm very pleased. I'm pleased we managed to get the whole thing scaled down. It was going to be a 10-lane superhighway. I think that was too much. The current scheme, particularly now we've managed to get the toll removed, is actually, to me, the right way to go forward to deal with the collisions, to deal with the deaths, to deal with the greenhouse emissions coming out as cars are stuck there time after time after time. Yes, it would be lovely if we can get 20, 30 years' time where there are many, many alternatives. But realistically now, we have to get on and fix the crisis that there is there. But we don't need to have massive road schemes everywhere in the country just because people might want them.
So, hang on.
Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, it's really important that we actually get past the bickering between unions and management and politicians of different political persuasions. We need to allow the railways to thrive and to deliver value for money. In terms of the East Coast Railway, it's an example now of a train service that will actually deliver greater capacity under privatisation. It will deliver a better deal for employers and for taxpayers. There will be benefits from investments in trains, station and staff, and the journeys will be faster. We can look back in the past for some solutions, but actually, ladies and gentlemen, we're building the future of this country, and we need to be pragmatic, we need to be cost efficient. We cannot go back to the days of bankrupting this nation. We have to look to the future, and we have to be sensible. The beauty of being in Cambridge is actually there's a lot of knowledge here that can go to central government in terms of technology or renewable fuels for trains. We can be part of that process, but we must be alive to the fact that this is a process over a long period of time. Any other way, shape or form of trying to rescale back what we have in terms of the rail industry is just looking in the past.